It's early June 2011. The Dallas Mavericks are looking to win the NBA Finals. This will be their first championship in franchise history if they can pull this off. This is actually their 30th season as a franchise, and these last 30 years have had a lot of ups and downs. They started out in the 80s as a brand new team and spent a few years building a decent roster before becoming relatively successful in the mid to late 80s, but just couldn't overcome the juggernaut out west known as the LA Lakers. Going into the 90s, their best players would be traded away, hurt, or had off-the-court troubles, so the Mavericks had to rebuild. They thought they struck gold a few times in the draft, but only led to a bad combination of personalities. Once they ended that experiment, Dallas really struck gold on draft night, this time getting someone who would keep the team afloat for years to come. New ownership came along, and while making one questionable move, he was still able to prove his competence. Instead of going after big blockbuster moves, he would just add piece after piece, year after year, as the Mavericks became one of the winningest teams in the 2000s. Even though they won a lot, many of their deep playoff runs fell flat, and basketball fans began to doubt that they could ever win a championship. But by 2011, they managed to stay focused and put a hold on the legendary team's championship goals, all while getting sweet revenge in the process. Here is a story of the Dallas Mavericks. The Dallas Mavericks almost didn't exist. In 1978, Don Carter, who was the owner of a company called Home Interiors and Gifts, was interested in bringing the NBA to Dallas as a gift for his wife, who played high school basketball in Dallas. Sounds like a great husband if you ask me. The NBA, however, was already losing money, and adding another team to Texas when they already had the San Antonio Spurs and the Houston Rockets just didn't make sense to them. Still, in 1979, at the All-Star Game, then Commissioner Larry O'Brien announced that the league will be adding a new team to Dallas in the 1980-81 season for $12.5 million, which Carter and his group only had to pay half of. The name came from one of the members of the ownership group, James Garner, who was an actor that played Brett Maverick in the 50s show Maverick. It was between that, the Dallas Wranglers, and the Dallas Express. I think they made the right choice. Now, the basketball begins. As an expansion team, the Mavericks had to get players in an expansion draft, which means every team had to protect a certain amount of players on their roster, and the Mavericks could select an unprotected player from each team. The 1980 expansion draft didn't net Dallas any stars, to nobody's surprise, so when the actual 1980 draft came, Dallas with the 11th pick selected high-scoring forward Kiki Vandeweghe out of UCLA, who completely refused to play for his new Dallas team. His holdout lasted almost 2 months into the season, with Dallas finally trading him to the Nuggets for 2 future first-round picks. In the 80-81 season, the Mavericks started their new franchise at the newly built Reunion Arena with their new head coach Dick Motta, as bad as they could be. They won 15 games in their first season. This poor season earned them the #1 pick in the 1981 draft, where they would select Mark Aguirre from DePaul. With one of the picks they got from Denver, they picked Orlando Blackman at number 9, and then got forward Jay Vincent at number 24. Over the next several years, the Mavs would have a solid team, adding notable players like Derek Harper, Sam Perkins, and Roy Tarpley, making their first ever playoff run in the 1983-84 season, only their 4th year of existence. This would start a run of 5 straight playoff appearances and 6 playoff appearances in 7 years to cap off the 80s. 3 of those playoff appearances they would bump into the Showtime Lakers, who each time proved to be too much for the young Mavs to handle. While things were looking up for Dallas, I have to point out that even though they were good, they could have possibly been much better. While they got good players in the draft, it seems like they always passed up on a better player. In the 1981 draft, they got Mark Aguirre, who was a 3-time All-Star and a high scorer for the Mavs in his own right, but they could have instead drafted future Hall of Fame point guard Isaiah Thomas. In the 1983 draft, they selected Dale Ellis with the 9th pick and Derek Harper with the 11th pick. Both good players, but that means they twice passed up on drafting Clyde Drexler. In 1984, they picked Sam Perkins at number 4, and the very next pick was Charles Barkley, and later on, John Stockton was selected. In '85, they picked Detlef Schrempf, when Karl Malone and Joe Dumars were still available. Do I need to keep going? Roy Tarpley over Ron Harper, Randy White over Tim Hardaway and Shawn Kemp. Man, the Mavs ownership must be kicking themselves for how they drafted in the 80s. I don't know if anyone's keeping count, but they passed upon 7 different Hall of Famers during that time. Still, they managed to overachieve and consistently make their way into the playoffs. As the 80s came to an end, their core group would start to move. Mark Aguirre would be traded to the Pistons and go on to win 2 rings immediately. Sam Perkins would sign with the Lakers and go straight to the finals, and Rolando Blackman, who wound up being the Mavs franchise leader in points, also went to the finals after he was traded to the Knicks. Detlef Schrempf was traded to Indiana, and there he would become a star, and on top of all that, Roy Tarpley, who was supposed to be the future of the franchise, faced multiple arrests for drugs and alcohol and eventually received a lifetime ban from the NBA. Thus, we enter the 90s, where the Mavericks will begin a rebuilding period. The 90s was a stagnant era for the Dallas Mavericks. They began the decade at the bottom of the league, racking up on lottery picks year after year. In the 4-year span between 91 and 95, Dallas had 4 straight top 10 picks and 3 top 5 picks. These top 5 picks were all potential stars. Jim Jackson, the high-scoring wing from Ohio State drafted in 92, Jamal Mashburn, another high-scoring forward from Kentucky taken in 93, and Jason Kidd, the high-speed point guard from Cal taken in 94. The 3 of them would be nicknamed the 3 J's. By the end of 94, the Mavericks had a promising young core that was expected to perform well. While the other team in Dallas, the Cowboys, were winning championships with their own big 3, the Mavericks with their 3 stars never really amounted to much. Jackson and Mashburn both felt like the other was taking too many shots. Remember, they both basically played the same position and both were scorers, so some might have expected the 2 to have issues sooner or later. First, Jackson was getting more shots than Mashburn. Then, towards the end of the 94-95 season, Jackson's season ended early from an ankle injury, so Mashburn took over as the team's leading scorer, and the team actually improved, almost making the playoffs. When Jackson came back at the beginning of the 95-96 season, he apparently took issue with the fact that Mashburn was now the team's leading scorer, which caused the 2 to resent each other, and at one point they even stopped speaking to each other until Mashburn had season-ending knee surgery. Not sure if this beef was the cause, but in 96, founder of the Mavericks Don Carter sold the team for $125 million to Dallas real estate developer Ross Perot Jr., who later would admit that he didn't really know much about basketball. Even Jason Kidd was getting fed up with all the drama, and his issue seemed to be more with Jackson than anybody because he didn't like how Jackson acted as a teammate, plus the 2 were involved in a few love triangles, including one well-publicized triangle with singer Toni Braxton. That particular one may or may not be a rumor, but who knows. So Kidd demanded that either he or Jackson be traded. The 3 J's were supposed to turn the Mavericks around, but they just couldn't make it work. On February 7, 1997, the Mavs hired Don Nelson to be their new GM. Nelson had already been a successful and innovative coach in the NBA, coaching the Bucks in the 80s and the Warriors in the 90s, winning 3 total Coach of the Year awards. He was responsible for creating the concept of the point forward, and he brought a high-tempo run-and-gun style to his teams, also known as Nelly Ball. By the end of the season, Nelson decided that he was going to also take over as head coach of the team, but not just yet, we'll get to that. First, he wanted to make some moves as soon as possible and turn this franchise around. After a few losing seasons, a lack of camaraderie, and constant drama that led to an irreparable rift between them, Don Nelson decided to blow up the Jason, Jim, and Jamal experiment just 3 seasons into it. Nelson was hired February 7th, and by February 17th, they were all gone. Mashburn was traded to Miami, Jackson was traded to the Nets in a package where they would receive 7'6" Shawn Bradley, and Kidd was sent to the Suns in a package where they would receive shooting guard Michael Finley, who would be a bright spot for the team for years to come. Finley was drafted out of the University of Wisconsin in the first round of the 95 draft, and coming out of college, he was actually being compared to Michael Jordan. While he wasn't quite like Mike, he was a promising young scorer for the Suns before Dallas acquired him halfway through his second season, and he would quickly take over as the best player, for the time being at least. In the 97-98 season, in his first full year with the Mavericks, Finley rose to stardom and led Dallas in scoring, assists, and steals. And midway through this season is when Nelly finally took over as head coach. The Mavs only won 20 games this season, but with the locker room problems cleaned up and a new inexperienced coach, Dallas was ready to turn this team into a contender. June 24th, 1998, it's draft day. Dallas was in need of a point guard, so during the draft, they traded Pat Garrity, Martin Millsap, and Bubba Wells, and a future first-round draft pick to the Suns for Steve Nash, the scrappy Canadian point guard who was entering his third season and showed promise, but he was a backup to the former Maverick Jason Kidd. Dallas now had a point guard, but earlier in the night, they made a possibly even more important trade. Dallas had the 6th pick and drafted Robert Traylor from Michigan, but then traded him to the Bucks for their 19th pick, Pat Garrity, who was used to get Nash, and the number 9 pick, Dirk Nowitzki, out of Germany. Nowitzki was a 6'11" sweet-shooting big man whose name started floating around the NBA in 1997 when he played in the Hoops Heroes Tour, where he played against NBA stars like Charles Barkley, Scottie Pippen, and Michael Jordan. Barkley was so impressed by Dirk that he tried to recruit him to play at his former college, Auburn, even offering him some money. Listen to him tell the story.
Dirk was like 18. This is when Scottie was quote-unquote the best defender in the world. So Dirk is kicking our ass. He's got like 25 at halftime. And me and Michael like, Scottie, you got to pick it up a little bit. He's, man, I'm going to lock him down in the second half. I'm going to lock him down in the second half. Dirk finished with like 52. So I was like, dude, who the hell are you? He starts talking. He's like 18, 19. I says, where you going to play at? He says, I have to go in the Army. I said, dude, you can't go in the Army playing like that. I said, I tell you what. So I called Nike. I says, find out about this kid. Tell him I'll give him anything he wants to go to Auburn.
Dirk had already made a name for himself in Germany, winning the German Basketballer of the Year award in 1998. During the pre-draft process, the 20-year-old Dirk had risen up the ranks on a national level after making a name for himself in the Nike Hoop Summit, where the top high school players around the world battle it out in front of NBA and college scouts. There, Dirk outplayed a bunch of NBA prospects by scoring 33 points, which was the record at the time, and getting 14 rebounds. One of the coaches in this Hoop Summit was Dallas coach Don Nelson. He was impressed by Dirk's ball handling and his shooting range, and from there, he knew he had to get Dirk on his team, and on draft night, he would make it happen. The trades were met with criticism, with people saying that the Bucks got a steal when they traded Traylor for Dirk, and many people said that Dirk was overrated and that Nash was unproven. But Don Nelson didn't care and had high hopes now that he put Nash and Nowitzki with Michael Finley. Now, with a new coach and a new Big Three form, the Mavericks were ready to begin a new era. The 1998-1999 season started out in a lockout, with teams playing only 50 games in the year, and Dallas didn't get much time to build any chemistry at all. While Michael Finley held his own, Nash struggled in his first season as a starter, and rookie Dirk didn't do much better. Dirk was getting overpowered by NBA forwards and earned the nickname Irk Nowitzki because he had no D. Clever, right? He even said that he was so frustrated that he considered going back to Germany. Dallas would win only 19 games that year. The next season, even with Nash missing several games due to an ankle injury, Dallas would improve, although they still missed the playoffs. Finley was still Finley, leading the team in scoring, and he made the All-Star team, and Dirk saw a major improvement on the court, being voted the runner-up for the Most Improved Player of the Year award behind Jalen Rose. This was also the year that internet billionaire and longtime Mavericks fan Mark Cuban purchased the team for $280 million, and he vowed to give all of his energy to turn this into a winning franchise. In the 2000-2001 season, the Mavericks' Big Three would hit their stride, with Finley making his second straight All-Star game, and Dirk would become the Mavericks' first player ever to be selected to an All-NBA team when he was voted to the third team at the end of the year. With the addition of All-Star Juwan Howard to complement them, Dallas would go 53-29 and made the playoffs for the first time since 1990. They would beat the Stockton and Malone Utah Jazz team in 5 games, but then lose in the second round to Tim Duncan and the San Antonio Spurs in 5 games. After this season, Dirk earned himself a 6-year, $90 million contract extension. The next year, Dallas would begin playing in their new arena, the American Airlines Center, and got a new logo, but everything else was more of the same. Them winning over 50 games, Finley staying consistent, Dirk making another All-NBA team, second team this time, and wait, Nash actually made the third team. Dirk and Nash both making their first All-Star game, but once again, they were bounced in the second round in 5 games, this time to the Kings, as they had no answer for Mike Bibby. For the 02-03 season, with Nelly Ball still in effect on offense, Mark Cuban and Don Nelson wanted to put more of an emphasis on defense, so they implemented a zone defense that was anchored by Sean Bradley and Rafe LaFrentz, who were both big-time shot blockers. Dallas started the season winning their first 14 games, and for the month of November 2002, their big three of Nash, Dirk, and Finley all won Co-Players of the Month, the first time that's ever happened. The team's run-and-gun style of play helped them become the highest-scoring offense in the NBA. Dirk was especially good, raising his averages again and making his third straight All-NBA team while leading Dallas to 60 wins, which is the most they've ever won in a season. In the playoffs, after going the full 7 games in the first 2 rounds, the Mavericks made it to the conference finals and would meet up again with the San Antonio Spurs. Dallas would win Game 1 when the Big Three scored a combined 86 points, and in clutch fashion with 14 seconds left, Michael Finley would make the go-ahead layup. Then Dirk would sink 2 clutch free throws that sealed the Game 1 win on the road. San Antonio would come back and win the next game. The series was tied 1-1 when in Game 3, Dirk injured his knee after a collision with Spurs guard Manu Ginobili and had to sit out for the rest of the series, and the Mavericks would lose Game 3. The Spurs won Game 4, but the Mavericks stole Game 5. Now they were down 3-2 going into a Game 6 with a chance to force a Game 7, where they had a chance for Dirk to come back. Dallas looked like they were going to win Game 6 too, going into the fourth quarter up by 13, when the Spurs went on a scoring spree, starting the fourth quarter going on a 25-2 run, led by a Steve Kerr 3-point barrage, sucking all the life out of the American Airlines Arena. Dallas would end up losing in 6 without their star. In the offseason, Dallas would draft high-flying forward Josh Howard and would trade their 6-man Nick Van Exel for Antawn Jamison, then traded starting center Rafe LaFrentz for Antoine Walker, and decided to have Dirk play center. To adjust to his new position, Dirk put on 20 pounds of muscle, which would slow him down a bit, and his numbers took a dip, and so did his team's record. Although they still managed 52 wins and made the playoffs, they would lose to the Kings in the first round. Once again, they had no answer for the crafty Mike Bibby. Those Kings really used to give the Mavericks problems. After that first round exit in 2004, point guard Steve Nash became a free agent and was looking to re-sign with Dallas, but here's what else was going on. Over in LA, the Lakers were looking to break up their dynamic duo of Kobe and Shaq, and their owner Jerry Buss decided to keep Kobe over Shaq, so Shaq was now on the trade market. From the early looks of it, Dallas was in prime position to land the Diesel, with Shaq and Mark Cuban having a mutual admiration for each other, and Cuban being seemingly willing to give him the contract extension that he was looking for. The Lakers were willing to make the trade, but they wanted Dallas to include Nowitzki, which the Mavs wouldn't agree to under any circumstances. They were, however, willing to include Nash in the trade. Nash, who wanted to stay in Dallas, probably wasn't too happy about that, right? Now, remember, it's still free agency and Nash needs a new deal. He was looking for at least a 5-year contract. Mark Cuban was already paying his other key players almost $50 million combined and decided that he didn't want to risk paying a 30-year-old Nash in a long-term deal, so he offered him a 4-year contract worth close to $9 million a year. At this point, Nash was not only feeling unwanted, but he was reportedly feeling insulted. The Suns, who made Nash their top priority this offseason, offered Nash a 6-year deal worth $65 million, which both Nash and Don Nelson tried to get Cuban to match the deal, but he didn't, and Nash then became a Phoenix Sun. There he would blossom and pioneer an even better offense than what he had in Dallas, and he would go on to immediately win back-to-back MVPs and had a few battles with the Mavericks in the process. With Nash gone and their unwillingness to get rid of Dirk, the Shaq trade fell through and he ended up getting traded to the Miami Heat. Cuban wanted to make up for losing the All-NBA point guard and give the roster a bit of a makeover, so on draft night in 2004, he traded Antawn Jamison, who just won the 6th Man of the Year award, to the Wizards for their number 5 pick Devin Harris, drafted out of Wisconsin, and the 30-year-old former All-Star Jerry Stackhouse. He also traded for big man Eric Dampier from the Warriors, then traded Antoine Walker to the Hawks, and in return got a key player in the story, Jason Terry. Terry, nicknamed the Jet, was a combo guard who was now entering his 6th season in the league after being a reliable scoring threat for the Atlanta Hawks in his first 5 seasons. Now he's taking on a huge task of having to be Steve Nash's replacement. The 04-05 season started, and now Dirk was the clear-cut face of the franchise, and he played as such. He averaged career highs in points, blocks, and assists, and on December 2nd, 2004, he had his signature game when he scored a career-best 53 points in an overtime win against the in-state rivals Houston Rockets.
From way downtown. Yes! Come on!
Nowitzki made the All-NBA team for the first time in his career and was third in MVP voting, which was won by his good friend Steve Nash. Looks like Dallas made a mistake in not keeping him around, huh? It's funny because during the season, head coach Don Nelson stepped down from his coaching position, later saying that he lost interest in coaching the Mavericks once they chose not to keep Nash. His assistant Avery Johnson took over as the Mavs coach, and his son Donnie Nelson took over as the GM. After winning 58 games in the regular season, they had a bit of a scare in the beginning of the playoffs, going down 0-2 to the Houston Rockets before eventually winning the series in 7. Next, in a perfect storybook fashion, the Mavericks would have to face Steve Nash and the new-look Phoenix Suns, whose fast-paced style of play ended Dallas' 3-year run as the league's highest-scoring offense. The two teams would split the first 4 games of the series, and although Dirk was decent and managed to hit this game winner in Game 2, one thing was evident: he could not handle Amari Stoudemire, Phoenix's young, high-flying power forward who managed to score 107 points in just the first 3 games. Dallas would lose Game 5, and in Game 6, they would have the lead for most of the game, but in the final minute of the 4th quarter, Nash would score 8 straight points, including this pull-up 3 on Jason Terry that would send the game into overtime. Dirk berated Terry for letting this happen. In overtime, Nowitzki couldn't buy a bucket, missing all 5 of his shots, including a few relatively easy baskets, and missing a clutch free throw in the final minute. He finished with 28 points, but only hit 9 of his 25 shots, as the Mavericks lose the game and thus the series. Nash, on the other hand, scored 39 and had 12 assists and 9 rebounds as he sent his former team home. The Mavericks ownership would make an interesting decision in this offseason. A lot of times we'll see a team with a championship caliber roster lose in the playoffs, then panic and start to make big changes. But Dallas, on the other hand, would decide to keep this team mostly as is. In the 04-05 season, it was everybody's first full season together, so now, in this upcoming 05-06 season, the team would be much more familiar with each other, and it would be Avery Johnson's first full year at head coach, so they were confident going into the year. One move they did make was getting rid of their longtime star Michael Finley, who was waived using the amnesty clause. Finley was the team's highest paid player, but was now 32 and past his prime, and Dallas decided to move on from him, and he would end up signing with the San Antonio Spurs. Now Dirk was the only player left from Dallas's big 3 of the early 2000s. Dirk, who was now 27 and in the prime of his career, now had the electric Jason Terry and third-year wing Josh Howard as his main running mates, and both players were very efficient. Plus, Devin Harris was beginning to come into his own, and they had Jerry Stackhouse as their 6th man. Together they would finish 60-22, while Dirk, for the 2nd year in a row, made first-team All-NBA and finished 3rd in MVP voting to an up-and-coming LeBron James and yet again, Steve Nash. I know these two must miss each other by now. In the first round, they completely swept Pau Gasol and the Memphis Grizzlies. Then in the second round, they would go head-to-head with the Spurs, who they already lost a few playoff battles with in the early 2000s. And now they had Dirk's old friend Michael Finley, but Nowitzki was a much more mature player this time around. Dallas nearly blew a 3-1 lead, but in Game 7, down 3 at the end of the 4th, Dirk got an and-1 layup on Ginobili, then tied it with a free throw. Then he got this clutch block on Tim Duncan to send the game into overtime, where Dallas would win and move on to the next round. In the conference finals, once again, the Mavericks would go up against the point guard that they let go 2 seasons ago, Steve Nash, who was now 2 MVPs richer, but was missing his co-star Amari Stoudemire, who missed most of the season due to microfracture surgery. The teams would split the first 4 games, and the series would be 2-2 when in Game 5, Dirk erupted for 50 points, including 22 in the 4th quarter, to put them away. Then in Game 6, the Mavericks would win, making this the first time the franchise would ever make it to the finals. After years of being contenders, they finally made it to the finals. They weren't picked to be a finals team, but it came as no surprise to them. They would face the Miami Heat, who had a young rising star in Dwayne Wade. Wade was now in his 3rd year in the NBA. Drafted 5th in the infamous 2003 draft from Marquette, he quickly established himself as a star in this league, already making 2 All-NBA teams. Pat Riley surrounded Wade with savvy vets, with the most important one being aging but still dominant Shaquille O'Neal. The Heat marched through the Eastern Conference, losing only 5 games in the playoffs up until this point, but the Mavericks felt confident as they swept the regular season series against Miami and neither game was close. The Mavericks were picked as favorites to win the series, and they proved why when they took the first 2 games of the finals at home. Game 3 was winding down, with Dallas having a chance at going up 3-0, but down 1 with 3 seconds left, Dirk missed a game-tying free throw. He got another chance at tying the game after a Wade missed free throw, but made a bad pass at the rim that Wade got his hands on, and now the series was 2-1. The Mavericks were blown out in Game 4, which tied the series. Here's where things get interesting. Game 5 started with the Mavericks in control, but in the second half, Dwayne Wade started getting to the line an absurd amount of times. 15 times to be exact, and the game went into overtime. With 9 seconds left in overtime, Dirk hit a clutch jump shot over Shaq, which gave the Mavericks a 1-point lead. Then, Wade got the ball in the backcourt, drove to the lane, and got a questionable foul call at the rim. I won't say anything, I'll let you guys decide if you think it was a foul or not. So Dirk was called for this foul, and Wade will go to the line. Now there's 1.9 seconds on the clock and the Mavericks have 1 timeout left. If Wade hits his 2 free throws, Dallas would be able to call their timeout and start the possession on the other side of the court right by their basket. Obvious situation. But when Wade hit his first free throw, for some reason, the refs called a timeout for Dallas, thinking that Josh Howard called the timeout here, which you can see Coach Avery Johnson telling them that he didn't want a timeout yet. What is going on? Wade would sink his second free throw to go up 1, and Dallas would have to settle for a half-court shot since they had no more timeouts, which they missed, and Miami would go on to win the game and go up in the series 3-2. Wade finished the game with 43 points and 25 free throws, which is how many the Mavericks shot as an entire team. Game 6 was more of the same. Wade got to the line 21 times, Dirk missed a few clutch shots down the stretch, and Miami secured the close win, beating Dallas for the 2006 NBA championship. Comments by the Mavericks center Desana Diop and owner Mark Cuban showed that Dallas was not too happy about the outcome and didn't think that it was fair. Out of the 6 most free throw attempts in finals history, Wade in Game 5 and 6 accounted for 2 of them. Whether they had a gripe or not, they still had to deal with the loss and prepare for the next season. Again, ownership didn't feel the need to make any changes. After all, they came within 2 games of a championship. They would, however, actually add this guy, JJ Barea, point guard out of Northeastern University, who the Mavericks signed after he went undrafted in the 2006 draft. Other than that, the team stood pat because they knew running it back with the same core was their best chance of winning a title. After all, the other top teams in the West either weren't ready yet, weren't what they used to be, or Dallas already had them figured out. It's November 8th, 2006, and the Mavericks just lost to the Los Angeles Clippers, and they were now 0-4 to start the season. This 06-07 campaign was supposed to be a big one. The Mavericks still had basically the same championship team, but this was the first time in franchise history that they started 0-4. To make things worse, 2 days before, Josh Howard sprained his ankle and was ruled out for 2 weeks. All hope seemed to be lost. But suddenly, a switch was flipped, and Dallas would win 44 of the next 49 games going into the All-Star break, where Dirk would make yet another All-Star team and Josh Howard would make his first All-Star team. The Mavericks were elite this year, finishing the year with a franchise record 67 wins, which at the time was the 6th best record in NBA history, let alone a franchise record. Dirk had his most efficient season yet, becoming the 5th player in history to join the 50-40-90 club, where a player shoots 50% from the field, 40% from 3, and 90% from the free throw line. After such a great season, the Mavericks were on a mission to prove that they should have won the title the year before, not Miami, and with their top 5 offense and top 5 defense, they were poised to make another title run, and this year was bound to be a cakewalk. But then they got embarrassed in the first round of the playoffs by the Golden State Warriors. The Warriors had Dallas' former coach Don Nelson, and he had all the keys to stopping their star Nowitzki. He put smaller, quicker players on him, which would force Dirk to settle for tough, long-range jump shots. This was a strategy that Nelson knew all too well because many teams used the same tactic to beat the Mavericks in the playoffs while Nelson was coaching them. Nelson actually used this against the Mavericks during the regular season. While Dallas only lost 15 games, 3 of them were to Nelly's Warriors as they swept the season series against the Mavericks. A few weeks ago, the Warriors didn't even look like they were going to make the playoffs, but they got hot at the very end of the season and snuck in as 8th seed. This was their first playoff appearance since Nelly led them there in '94, and now it's the first round. After winning 3 of the first 5 games, the Warriors were back at home up 3-2. In the crowd at Oracle Arena, there was a sea of 20,000 yellow towels and yellow shirts that said "We Believe" on them, and they were all there to witness one of the biggest upsets in sports history. Jerry Stackhouse was the Mavericks' best player that game, but it wasn't enough as the rest of the team played poorly, especially Dirk, who only scored 8 points, which capped off his lowest scoring playoff series of his career, and the Mavericks were sent home in embarrassing fashion. They were the first 1 seed to lose to an 8 seed in the best-of-7 series. Disappointment would be an understatement. To make things worse, less than 2 weeks later, Dirk was called to come back to Dallas to accept the NBA MVP award, an award given to the best player in the regular season, but not handed out until the middle of the playoffs. Getting this award must have been such a bittersweet feeling for Dirk, but if you look at his expression, it looked like it was just bitter.
Still a little sad about how things happened in the postseason.
He just went through the most humiliating moment of his career, only to be awarded the highest personal honor that you could win in the NBA. His reputation was beginning to take a hit. People were starting to label him a choker who couldn't carry his team to win a ring. The next few years wouldn't help his case. In the middle of the 07-08 season, Dallas traded their young and athletic point guard Devin Harris for an old friend, former Maverick Jason Kidd, who was much older and more experienced than he was his first time in Dallas, but now had 2 finals appearances under his belt. This move was controversial because if you remember, the whole reason Dallas didn't re-sign Nash was because they didn't want to pay an older point guard. Nash was only 30 at the time and went on to win 2 MVPs after they let him go. Kidd was about to be 35 and was set to get paid $21 million this year. This move showed that Dallas wasn't worried about their future and wanted to win now. They won 51 games in the season, but in the first round were ousted by the up-and-coming New Orleans Hornets led by a young Chris Paul. This loss prompted Mark Cuban to fire coach Avery Johnson, who was 3-12 in the playoffs since they went up 2-0 to Miami that year in the finals, and replaced him with Rick Carlisle. Even under Carlisle, not much changed. Dallas would win another 50 games. Jason Terry, now playing a new role off the bench, managed to take home the 6th Man of the Year award. Dallas made it out of the first round, beating the Spurs in 5 just to lose to the Nuggets in 5. Now it's the 09-2010 season, and Cuban realizes that some personnel changes had to be made. A few players that were key to Dallas' success were moved. Jerry Stackhouse, who was now 35, and Josh Howard, who was getting older and had been dealing with injuries. They got some solid pieces in return in Shawn Marion, Caron Butler, Brandon Haywood, and Deshaun Stevenson. Would these be the moves to put them over the top? Nope, same old song. 50 plus wins, then a first round loss, this time to the Spurs. Another year of regular season success that led to postseason failure. For the entire NBA, the summer of 2010 will be a pivotal one. This year might have been the biggest free agency period in the history of the league. There were some obvious high-profile free agents and some other big names that flew under the radar because of all the attention that one was getting, LeBron James. What a lot of people don't remember about 2010 is that Dirk was also a free agent this summer. Dirk had a player option that he declined that made him an unrestricted free agent. Nobody really thought that Dirk would leave Dallas, and they were right as Dirk re-signed with Dallas on a 4-year, $80 million deal. These numbers were important because he could have signed for $96 million, but he chose to take less so the team could have extra money to build a championship roster. The Mavericks would flirt with the idea of signing guards Dwayne Wade and Joe Johnson, but Joe ended up staying in Atlanta, and as we all know, Wade stayed in Miami and was joined by LeBron James and Chris Bosh. After all the other big names signed elsewhere, Dallas made one of the more underrated moves in franchise history. Center Eric Dampier was nearing the end of his career, and Dallas wanted and needed to improve on their interior defense, so they would make a trade where they sent him to the Bobcats and got back Tyson Chandler. Chandler was the second pick in the 2001 draft by the Bulls, and after a slow start to his career, he teamed up with Chris Paul in New Orleans, and there he became a lob threat and a defensive force. After spending a year in Charlotte, Mark Cuban brought Chandler in to help strengthen the Mavericks front line, and it definitely helped. For the 2010-2011 season, having Tyson Chandler anchor Rick Carlisle's defensive schemes helped the Mavs get back to being a top 10 defense, and their offense remained potent as it always was. Dirk did sustain a knee injury in late December and missed 9 games, which is the most he's ever missed. 4 days after Dirk's injury, the team's second leading scorer, Caron Butler, went down with a season-ending knee injury, and Dallas would lose all their momentum. But right when Dirk came back, the Mavs picked up right where they left off, finishing the year with 57 wins and earning themselves a 3 seed. As good as they were, people were starting to be skeptical of what the Mavs can do. The Mavericks, and specifically Dirk, were being classified as a regular season team that still couldn't win when it counted, with the choker label still following them around. Did these claims have any merit? Up to this point, Dirk has been in the league for 13 seasons, and in the last 11, he's led the Mavericks to 50 wins and made the playoffs each time. He's seen many teams rise as contenders in the West, but while they fell, Dirk consistently stayed near the top of the tough Western Conference. Actually, in the last 11 seasons, Dallas has the second most wins in the league. Even in 2004, when they lost their star point guard, they didn't miss a beat and remained one of the league's best teams. Dirk wasn't getting the credit that he should have for carrying this Mavericks team as long as he did. He had good teammates along the way, but as many changes as his team went through, there's no way they should have remained this consistently good. They did suffer some heartbreaking losses in the playoffs before they made it to the finals, but what doesn't get talked about is that 4 of the 5 playoff appearances during this span, they lost to the team that had the best record in the NBA. Then, they lost in the finals to Miami. 3 of the last 4 seasons since their finals appearance, Dallas has been bounced out of the playoffs in the first round, which added to the critiques. After they lost to Miami in 2006, Wade was quoted as saying that Dirk wasn't enough of a leader in that finals and that's why they lost. Keep these comments in mind. Earlier this season, Chris Webber, who was on the early 2000s Kings teams that Dallas had trouble with, who is now a TNT analyst, went on a rant that pretty much echoed what many people around the league already thought, calling the Mavs soft.
Dallas, and I hate to bring up the S word, but you know when Dallas went to the
Let's
final,
be careful. Which S word are we using?
Soft.
Oh, okay, good.
Good. Yeah, I'm sorry. There's another.
Through all the criticism, the Mavericks weren't worried at all, and they just wanted to handle business. Experts and fans alike were concerned that Dallas's great season might just lead to another first-round loss, continuing the trend. But this team had a different feel to it. They didn't pay any superstars to join Dirk in the offseason, but they quietly built the deepest team in the league and were more balanced than the Mavericks of the past. The Mavericks took care of the Trailblazers in the first round, then met up with Kobe Bryant and the Lakers, who were coming off of 3 straight finals appearances and 2 straight championships. The Lakers were heavy favorites to win this series, but to everyone's surprise, Dallas swept them, and pretty easily too. This series showed the emergence of JJ Barea, who gave the Mavericks solid minutes off the bench. He had the Lakers so frustrated that Ron Artest gave him this cheap shot at the end of Game 2, and then at the end of Game 4, Andrew Bynum hit him with an even worse cheap shot. The conference finals came around, and now the Mavs were matched up against the up-and-coming Oklahoma City Thunder, who were a young team that had their own big 3, but they weren't enough for this Dallas team that was on a mission. Dirk had a huge game in Game 1, scoring 48 points and went 24 for 24 from the free throw line, a playoff record for most free throws without a miss. Dirk would stay hot for the series, going 59 for 61 from the line for the rest of the series while averaging 32 points and getting one more 40-point game. Dallas would beat the Thunder in 5 games, and they were back on their way to the finals and would be going against a familiar foe. The 2011 NBA Finals, a rematch of the 2006 Finals where Dallas lost to Miami in heartbreaking fashion. Dirk would finally get his chance to avenge his loss to Dwayne Wade, but this Miami Heat team looks a little different than they did in 06. A few months ago in the 2010 offseason, when the Mavericks were focused on re-signing their star, Miami was doing the same, but they paired their star with a few other stars, with one of them happening to be the best player in the league. After several years of falling short of a title in Cleveland, LeBron James decided to join Dwayne Wade along with Chris Bosh in Miami, and they immediately became the favorites to win the championship this year. After a slow start to the regular season, the Heat finally hit their stride and immediately made it to the finals, losing only 3 playoff games along the way. They would keep their momentum going by beating Dallas in Game 1 at home and stole a close Game 3 in Dallas. If it wasn't for a clutch performance by Dirk in Game 2, where he scored 7 points in the final minute, including the game winner with 3 seconds left, the Mavericks would have gone down 0-3, but instead they're down 2-1. Game 4, Dallas' defense completely shut down LeBron, holding him to 8 points, including 0 points in the fourth quarter, in a close game. While LeBron went scoreless in the fourth, Dirk and Jason Terry took care of the Mavs scoring and sealed the win for them to tie the series at 2-2. Here's where things would get interesting. So in the Mavs Game 4 victory, while Dirk was leading his team to a victory, he was also dealing with a high fever that reached up to 102 degrees during the game. He still finished with 21 points and 11 rebounds. Miami stars LeBron and Wade either didn't believe that Dirk was sick or just wanted to make fun of him. But before Game 5, after the team shoot around, cameras followed Wade and LeBron to their locker room, and here's where they decided to seemingly mock Dirk for being sick.
Oh, did y'all hear me cough? I think I'm sick. Hey, just grab it, man. Weather's great.
Now remember, when the Mavs lost the finals in 06, Wade publicly questioned Dirk's leadership because he said it was his fault that Dallas lost that year. Now, Wade is mocking him again, this time with LeBron. Publicly, Dirk just dismissed the fake coughing as childish.
Think of the video of Wade and LeBron coughing. Dwayne said that that was a real cough, by the way.
Well, I just thought it was a little childish, a little ignorant.
But years later, his teammate JJ Barea offered some insight to how Dirk really felt about Miami and them making fun of him.
He hated Miami. He hated LeBron, Wade, Bosh. And when LeBron and Wade started making fun of him by cuffing when he got a little sick, that clip really hurt him. That he will never say it, and that tape really hurt him, and that gave him a little bit extra that he didn't need, but it gave him a little extra to finish him off.
Publicly, Dirk said he wasn't using this as extra motivation, but in Game 5, he came out and scorched the Heat for 29 points. He was a man on a mission. Another player that was on a mission was this guy, Jason Terry. The player that was essentially the replacement to Steve Nash in 04 became a fan favorite in his own right. Here in his 7th season with the Mavs, he's been here through many ups and downs, including the 06 finals loss. In the middle of his prime, the team changed his role from a starter to coming off the bench, and instead of complaining, he upped his production. Dirk's reputation was on the line in these finals, but so was Terry's. Terry was so confident that Dallas would win it all this year that before the season started, he got a tattoo of the NBA championship trophy on his arm. If they lose in these finals, Terry would look silly as ever. So he couldn't just be another player on the floor. He had to play big so Dallas could win, and he did just that. In Game 5, although Dirk had 29, Terry made a great pass to Jason Kidd for a three-pointer that put them up by 5 with a little over a minute left. Then up by 4 with less than a minute left in the game, Terry buried a dagger 3 right in LeBron's face to put them up by 7 and made the score unreachable.
Terry, a long 3. Bang!
He would finish the game with 21, and Dallas is now up 3-2, and they're heading back to Miami needing just one more win. It's Game 6. If Miami wins, the series is tied 3-3, and they would host Game 7 in their home arena. If Dallas wins, they'll have their first championship in franchise history. In the first half, Dirk was ice cold, scoring 3 points on 1 for 12 shooting, but Jason Terry nearly couldn't miss, ending the half with 19 points on 8 for 10 shooting. The Mavs will go into the second half up by 2. Remember, it'll be in their best interest to close this series out now. They don't want to play a Game 7 on this Miami floor. Dirk has gotten a lot of criticism for being a playoff choker, and right now, he's not helping. Terry is keeping them afloat, but Dirk needs to turn it on. First, Dallas' defense would suffocate Miami in the third quarter, and they went into the fourth quarter with a 9-point lead. Then, Dirk came alive. In the fourth, every time Miami would hit a shot to try to get a run going, Dirk would respond with a huge shot after shot. Announcer Mark Jackson explained it the best.
Great players are just like death and taxes. Sooner or later, they're going to get you. Dirk, 8 big points in the fourth quarter. Dwindle down the clock, and then outstanding, unstoppable jump shot. That thing is pretty, and the boss man knows it.
If it wasn't Dirk hitting the shot, it was Jason Terry, who had a game-high 27. And if it wasn't Terry, it was JJ Barea, who, I would like to add, has been giving Miami problems all series. He was playing so well that Mike Bibby, who, if you remember, used to give the Mavericks all types of trouble in the playoffs in the early 2000s, was taken completely out of the lineup because of his inability to contain Barea. With 24 seconds left on the clock, the Mavs were up by 11, and Mario Chalmers tried to go up with the last-ditch three-pointer, but Terry stripped him and the ball ended up in Jason Kidd's hands where he was fouled. Before Kidd shoots these free throws, look at everybody's face on the Mavericks. It's like they can't believe it. It's as if the final seconds can't come fast enough. They don't want to celebrate yet because it's not real yet. 30 years. In their 30th year of existence, the Mavericks are about to win their first championship. They quickly rose to winning status in the 80s, but a few miscalculations during different drafts might have kept them from winning a ring sooner. But now they're about to get one after Jason Kidd hits these free throws. The same Jason Kidd that was supposed to help the Mavs win in the 90s, but instead was part of the most disastrous era in Dallas Mavericks history, where they lost more than any other team that decade. He went to New Jersey and came back to Dallas more accomplished and more mature, and is now helping run an offense that's about to win it all. Fast forward to 15 seconds left and Dallas would dribble out the clock to end the series. Look at Dirk. As soon as the game ends, the emotions took over. He finally did it. Silenced all of his critics who said he couldn't step up in the playoffs when it counted. Mark Cuban trusted Dirk and moved everybody but him. He even got rid of Steve Nash, which everyone said was a bad idea, but he stuck to his guns and built around Dirk, who wouldn't disappoint. After 13 years in the NBA, Dirk Nowitzki's legacy is now solidified, and the Dallas Mavericks are the 2011 NBA champions.